Hey everybody, it is Taylor of Summer Del Sol here. Today I'm going to try to procrastinate on installing lights and messing with bodywork by installing my seat harnesses instead. Let's do it. To start, I wanted to lay out my harness so it would get nice and hot in this Georgia sun. Great idea with those metal tabs. From here I mapped out all of my mounting locations. The center latch harness is going to attach just below the seat where it feeds through that hole. The driver's left harness is going to be mounted near that side wall panel, closer to the rear of the car. And the driver's right harness is a little tricky. You can see here where it fits just under those e-brake cables and it cuts it a little close. Lastly, I'll be using the rear horizontal harness bar. The goal is to remove those two metal tabs off the belt and wrap those around. With my plan thoroughly laid out, it's time to start with the latch belt. This is one of those rare moments where it's actually better to be a woman in automotive, as this belt needs to be as low as possible, if you get my drift. This will feed through the seat to the floor panel. But as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to get this as snug as possible to give me a good fitment. As I understand it, after a little research, you don't want this sitting too high on your stomach. It will not properly support you in an emergency. But for the uninitiated, I am not an expert. If I do any part of this wrong, please tell me. Once I was happy with the belt length, I fed it through the seat down to the floor with my piggy little fingers. This is a part I might come back to and change. I fed this facing forward, but I wanted to create less of a pinpoint in case of a stopping emergency. I might flip that tab forward so it sits flush on that mounting location. With the first one tightened down, it's on to the next. For the driver's right harness, I decided to go through the transmission tunnel in order to have the bolt facing the driver inside the car, which meant getting under the car, while it wasn't on stands. But I was able to slither underneath and get that bolt through. Here's where you can really start to see some interference with that e-brake cable. Since my seating position is so far back, I think I can get away with this. So what I did was loosely thread this on and eventually get two ratchets, one propped up against the driver's seat, so I could ratchet it on below under the transmission tunnel. With that one secured, I moved on to the left seat harness. Now if you're threading in eyelets, you're going to have a problem with this panel in particular. You'll notice there's going to be interference between the side panel of the car when you install those later. If you have eyelets, you'll want to swap to a standard bolt style like this so you can get that clearance you need. Just make sure that bolt is strong enough. Alright, that's the bottom half done. From here, I needed to start prepping the upper straps for the harness. In hindsight, I would have recommended myself to thread this through the top, as it was much simpler to do so on the second belt than it was this belt. But the main takeaway is the locking portion went down into the seat where the latch is. Once I had them both mocked up, I wanted to check those height levels, make sure they looked even, and seemed to have enough slack on the ends. Now, only for the time being, I'm going to rest these on the roll bar because I need to pull this tab off. You'll see in a little bit that this actually gets threaded underneath the roll bar first. But for now, just removing that metal tab that is so hot from the sun. I gave myself a little slack to work with and then promptly found out I needed some more. But with it all adjusted, you can see here now where I roll it underneath the bar, under this first tab, and then wove it over and through. As mentioned earlier, I'm not an expert. If I'm doing something wrong, please tell me. I would like to stay very much alive. With that belt tight, I folded the remainder over that first loop and through the rear. You'll see how it matches the one on the right as well. With those looped through, everything is in place, and I can mock up this system to make sure it all looks good. And of course I've got to test it out. I mean, it's so cool. I feel like a fighter pilot. And with that, I'm all locked in. I'm pleased with how secure it feels, but I'm even more pleased that I sprung for the pull-up strap. The only official advice I will give in this video is that it's so worth the extra money. You will kick yourself if you go with the pull-down style. It's impossible to pull those belts tight from the sides. With everything else done, the final piece is just to tie up the loose ends. You can either roll these up and zip tie them together, or if you're feeling particularly confident, you can cut them and use a lighter to keep the edges from fraying on the end. With one more task down, I'm that much closer to having to deal with bodywork and lighting. A good problem to have, but a daunting task around the corner for sure. As always, thank you guys so much for watching and following along, and stick with me as I dive into some bodywork and probably cry a little. Until then, I'll catch you next time. Feels pretty secure.